Welcome to Electronic Music Live, Christine Kakaire. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, it's a funny name that seems to have like a lot of different possible pronunciations. Like in Uganda, it's Kakaire, but Kakaire or Kakaire is either one of those is fine.
Okay, yeah. Cool. Well, I'm glad I got one of them correct. And look, you know, we've known each other for a while, but we worked at the same place, and I was like sort of crossed working experiences a long time ago. I think it was really 2005 or 6. So
yeah. Yeah, it was like a relay race. We passing the baton. Yeah.
Correct. And you've been living overseas since then?
Yeah, I think I left Australia in, memory, like 2007, I guess. And I was in London for almost like a year and a half. And then I moved to Berlin.
Okay. Well, look, you've been in these 20 years, the almost 20 years that have passed that since we met, and you've been quite involved in as a cultural journalist and activist in electronic music. I mean, most of the where you've contributed your work and where you've worked and has been has been involved with names like Abelton, SoundCloud, Pitchfork, Boiler Room, Crack, Resident Advisor. The list goes on. You've carved a career being sort of involved. Just tell me how did this all come about for you? Like, what's your journey? Like, I'd love to learn about that.
It's really funny hearing you kind of read off this list of names, because it makes it sound really coherent and intentional and planned out, and it really has not been the case. Like, I'm not somebody who's ever really been great at working with plans or setting goals and things like that. So a lot of it has just been, when I moved to Berlin, which is the first time I worked for Beatport 2 times. I moved here, and then my entire department got laid off, and then I kind of like bounced around from thing to thing. So it's all not being coherent. And like when I took a job here, I was kind of working on a project that was more about hip hop music, and then that went away. And then I worked for another music download store, and then I just had always had an interest in writing. And so that kind of led me to Resident Advisor, but I wasn't, I was working in a different department. So it's not at all being coherent. So
Sure.
It's been a bit of a mess, but the totality of it has been great, because it means that I've had like a lot of different experience. And I think now that I'm a freelancer, it's kind of where I belong, I think, being a free agent.
And when did that start for you as a free agent?
I think it was 2015, which is when I had been re-employed by Beatport, and I was back there for a couple of years. And I think at that point I realized that being a full-time employee was just not for me. It's not the conditions under which I thrive. Like, I'm really, as a person and as a worker, I guess, I really value freedom and variety. So in 2015, that was the period of time where I was kind of dipping my toe into freelance waters. And then I spent most of 2016 back in Sydney, actually, for kind of like personal family reasons. And then I came back right at the end of 2016, and have just been like riding that freelance train ever since.
But so looking back now, though, like if you were to sort of describe, like if you're looking back at all these, all the places that you've worked and projects, the dots connect, and it somehow has led you to not only, I mean, well, it's been around music and music culture, and significantly electronic and dance music, and so yeah, I guess that kind of led you to this decision to kind of be your own self and keep doing what you're doing and what you love. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. I think like when I kind of returned back to Berlin in end of 2016, I was like, I'm just going to see if this works. Like, I'm just going to see how far I can get just being a freelancer. And I think also just by sheer virtue of having been here for long enough, like, you know, like any kind of cultural or subcultural scene in any city, it ends up feeling like a little bit of a village. Everyone knows each other at a certain degree. And I think I had developed good relationships and goodwill as well. So that momentum was able to build in a way that felt really natural. So yeah, like all of this kind of all of these kind of chaotic approaches to what I would do as how I would occupy my work time kind of led to a place where I was able to figure things out on my own. And I feel super, super fortunate to still be able to do that.
Do you think the time away also gave you some perspective as well, like being sort of dipping out and sort of gave you, okay, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Just looking at your eyes.
Yeah. It's interesting. I often say that Berlin is a place where the best thing you can do to cultivate your relationship to Berlin is to leave it for a little bit of time and come back. I think it's such a unique place, and it's easy to become disillusioned with the less favorable aspects of like living in Germany and kind of navigating German bureaucratic systems and things like that. But I think every time I've gone away, even if it's just for a vacation, and then come back, I always have this sense of like, I'm really fortunate to be here. And this is like a pretty, it's still, you know, I think quite a unique space in terms of how it values culture and subcultures as well. So yeah, I think having that big stint away, I really kind of came back with a renewed sense of appreciation for it.
Has that changed over the years? Like, you know, because you've been there for quite some time, and Berlin's been home for most of this time. And you mentioned like all the appreciation and acceptance of subcultures. Is that something that has evolved and you've seen come from strength to strength, or has it been like that, you know, since you've been there? You've noticed that?
It's definitely shifted and continues to shift. I think Berlin is very unique for those reasons that I mentioned about kind of legitimizing subculture. But I think it is not, sometimes has an uneasy time of reckoning with like, okay, well, this is like a culture industry, like truly a culture industry that people are drawn to this city, people visit this city, people are attracted to this city because of the kind of cultural offerings that it has and, you know, the kind of infamous all nightclubs and things like that. So it's been really interesting to kind of observe and be kind of like a stakeholder in this city that's kind of still holding on to this reputation of like, we're just, you know, DIY, we're making something out of nothing. And it's like, this is actually really, really well-established industry at this point. So kind of, but also kind of grappling with the reality that, you know, Berlin is changing and there's a lot more money funneling into the city. There's a lot more of a presence of big tech companies and things like that. So it's been an evolution, but I think Berlin has still kind of managed to hang on to some kind of like of its core rebellious spirit.
And which is healthy for, I guess, keeping things fresh and vibrant. And you've been involved on the board of Berlin's Night Embassy. Tell me a bit about that. Like, are you still involved with that?
No, that was it's an ongoing project. which is funded by a big alcohol company. And the Berlin project was kind of like the pilot one. So they just did it, I believe, in Johannesburg. I think they just wrapped up that next session. And I think in the interim they did, I think either Moscow or St. Petersburg. So essentially it's, and I think this is also pretty representative of how like brands and like cultural agencies are now kind of thinking about how to work with subculture and music and all those types of things. So it's like, we've got a bunch of money. We want to be able to be involved in this city. So how do we go about getting these resources to young creatives and young collectives and people who are doing interesting things in this city? So they kind of provided a budget and a space over the course of, how long was it? I think 12 weeks or something like that. From memory, I haven't thought about the particulars of it for a while. I think there were like 6 different collectives who were each given a couple of weeks in this space, and they could curate it and book it and kind of lean on the resources of this bigger structure to promote the events. Yeah.
And you're also contributing to Berghain bimonthly, and that's new for you, isn't it?
Yeah. I've only just published the second column, so it's like I have one here, but it's on the other side of the room. But basically, the club produces this like physical flyer, which is like this huge. It's like a huge like old school map, and they print all of the lineups for that month. And there's like an interview on there with one of the artists who's playing in that month, and then there's also like one little page that's dedicated to just like a little editorial column. And it's always been there, but since Berghain has come back, since the kind of lockdowns, they approached me and another writer named Laura, who's a friend of mine as well, to ask us if we wanted to take over that space and to alternate it.
And what's the focus of this column? Like that these?
The remit is really broad. It's like, I was just asked, well, the only kind of instructions I was given was to just something that's connected to club culture. So the first one that I wrote in May was specifically about the topic of hedonism and how it manifests in club culture. And, I think Berlin is a really kind of well-known example of like what hedonism can look like. But I just wanted to kind of dial back and to really think about the word and think about how it's often enacted and how it could be like, I don't know, less violent and more ethical or equitable. And then the one that I did in July was specifically about a mix that I really love and have listened to a million times since it came out, which is the Claude Young DJ Kicks.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I noticed that they released the legendary Kruder and Dorfmeister finally like on digital, like on streaming platforms recently. I don't know if you caught the wave of that. It's pretty cool.
I did hear about it. Yeah,
it is actually quite a pinnacle mix, that one, the DJ Kicks one.
Absolutely
that version. Yeah.
For sure.
Now you've been quite it's part of your DNA, dance music culture in the last 20. Like you've been so. Do you ever find yourself running short of ideas to write about, or like?
Actually, no. I think that's one of the things that kind of keeps me connected, because for sure over these 20 years there have been points where I'm like, I need to just train in some other kind of profession, because I've definitely had moments of like, I can't do this anymore. Not so much in the last few years, I have to say, not so much since freelancing. But sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, do you run short of ideas? Do you find that it's difficult to pull inspiration from the fact that you've been in the industry doing this for 20 years? Like there must be so many things that have crossed your mind that you wanted to share and get out there.
Yeah, no, I don't. I feel like I don't run out of ideas because people who are creating music, like I'm just endlessly inspired by um, whether it's discovering somebody who's been around for a bit who I just wasn't aware of, or kind of honing in on new talents or new scenes. I feel like that is the thing that kind of keeps me energetic and engaged, um, and also because I do write, but I've kind of stopped in the last few years doing music reviews. Like I just found it to not be so rewarding. And it can also, the feedback to writing music reviews can also be, oh, people get upset. So I've started focusing more on writing profiles and like doing this Berghain column. Because I think there's always a story to tell. Everybody has a story. Every scene has a story. And it's just about kind of figuring out what that story is, which I think is endless.
So, like, if now you've kind of got, would you be able to say that you have, I guess, certain touch points that you want to make sure that are being covered in whatever from like now you've now know more of what you want to be writing, what kind of things that you want to be sharing, and you want. Yeah, so tell me what are like what would be some of those focal points that you're making sure that are being covered in your writing, because writing it definitely it's an art form, and it's something that you're pulling inspiration, but you also want to be contributing to the culture still, and there's all these other facets. So I'd love to know what inspires you, what makes you want to write on and why,
Oh, that's such a good question. I'll try not to waffle too much because I feel like I've been having conversations on this topic quite a bit recently. Like I think I've realized that just generally speaking, that providing context around culture is something that I think is kind of a through point, particularly with the writing and like with Black Artist Database. And I also teach now as well. So I think just being able to contextualize culture to give it more meaning, to give it more resonance, to give it a deeper historical roots, is something that I am just kind of like naturally drawn to and naturally want to continue doing. Sorry, what was the question again? It's even though it's 10 a.m., it's like my brain does not come online until like midday.
You started well. So the question is you were like, what do you want to be? What's inspiring you, and why do you want? And what do you want to write about? Just to kind of.
Okay, thank you for keeping me on track. And and when it comes to writing, I think it's been interesting. Like over the last 10 to 12 years of me writing, like the reasons for being attracted to certain things has shifted. I think when I first started, and I was less secure and more skittish and like less sure of myself, I would try to kind of like seek out stories of people or artists or sounds that were not being given attention in a way. Try to kind of find things that other people were overlooking or missing somehow. And then as my career progressed, I think as the idea of identity began to play more of a role, I was really attracted to ensuring that I paid a lot of attention to particularly like women and femme and queer and non-binary artists. And now I think and I think there's like a real mirror here just in terms of my own evolution as well. I think now, given the last couple of years, given the work that I'm doing in the Black Artist Database, I think the thing that, and it's not the only thing that I'm going to write about, but I think really taking a lot of care when it comes to presenting the stories of other black people and black artists in particular. As I've become more and more interested in the how can I put this? The way that language itself can be an oppressive system. So I'm like, I really want to lean into being really thoughtful with my words and presenting people's work in a way where, they feel cared for and cared about.
That's super interesting, because I feel so you're working now as a lead for the Black Database, and I wanted to touch on that. Like, what is first of all, what does that role mean, and what are you specifically doing for this initiative and project?
Okay, so Black Artist Database, I'll give like a quick history. It was founded by Nick Stellanancy and Kay Ferdinand, who are two Black British DJs and creatives and, peers and friends now. And in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, as all of these kind of conversations are swirling around online, that also kind of was in parallel to the initiatives from Bandcamp at that time through the earlier days of the pandemic. So they had these Bandcamp Fridays, where I think it was the first Friday of every month. You could purchase something from Bandcamp and all of the proceeds would go directly to the artist. There was no kind of fee being taken away. So Nix and Kay kind of put together this spreadsheet to say to people within electronic music, like, this is a way to demonstrate and appreciate kind of the Black creatives in this particular scene. Like, material resources are always going to be necessary, and because of like lots of different intersecting systems and oppressions, that Black artists are often left out of the spotlight. So that started as a spreadsheet, and then it was kind of like a open source spreadsheet. Lots of people could contribute to it. And it really kind of took off. And so it was decided that they were going to build like a website, kind of like a simple website called Black Bandcamp at that time, so that people could look through artists based on their name, based on their sound, et cetera, et cetera. And so I kind of had my eye on Black Bandcamp as we were kind of going through the second half of 2020, because I also found myself in the immediate wake of George Floyd's murder as a Black journalist. All of a sudden, my inbox was just like filled up with requests, all from white cis male art editors, being like, "Hey, do you want to like knock out some text for us on like Black oppression in the music industry? We need it tomorrow." And so the first time that happened, it was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, this is." I can't overstate how. Ooh.
Sorry.
That's all right. So in that moment of real like existential grief, having loads of people being like, "Hey, we need content," and so I posted a couple of public things, because also at that particular time I was like, I'm somewhat established in my career, and I've also diversified it, so I'm not completely dependent on this work. So I'm able to speak out as a representative of Black creatives, because the conversations I was having behind the scenes with other Black creatives was exactly the same. All of us were kind of expected to, in this moment of complete rawness and grief, to kind of shuffle into center stage, and it's like it still angers me so much. So I made a couple of public posts about that, which got really good feedback, but essentially nothing changed. I was still getting these like outrageous requests, last minute, poorly thought out, kind of virtue signaling kind of requests. And so at the same time, I was looking at Black Bandcamp, and I was like, I would really love to do something similar, but for Black creatives like me. So like writers and photographers and videographers and stylists, et cetera, et cetera. And so I also started this blank spreadsheet, and I wanted to call it Black Creative Database, and I didn't know where to start. And then a friend connected me to Black Artist Database Black Bandcamp at that point, and said, well, maybe you can do like a knowledge share about how to build something that's kind of a similar principle. And we started talking, and like within one conversation, it was like, well, why don't we do this together? So I became like part of the collective that's behind Black Bandcamp at that time, which then relaunched a few months later as Black Artist Database. And so within Black Artist Database, we launched at the end of last year the Black Creative Database. So you can go to Black Artist Database and search for incredible music from like the global diaspora of Black music makers. You can also look up events, you can listen to the podcasts, you can read the editorial, but you can also, if you're looking for Black creative workers, there is another database that I run called the Black Creative Database.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the back, well, we call it a backlash, but you know what actually happened as a response, and I guess people wanting to appear to be culturally responsible, and I guess that's why your inbox flooded. But I mean, yeah, I would like to just like discuss with you about on this subject a little, because I for my own learning, but also too, you know, from people who think. And not to make them wrong, but to shed a light on this is to kind of deconstruct that people who believe that I guess there are no sort of patriarchal sort of things that are white patriarchal systems that exist in electronic music. And and you mentioned, this is why I was kind of leading into this, because you mentioned, you know, earlier about being very strategic with the way you construct your wording, and because it is that the wording and the subconscious and behavioral patterns, these are the systems, right? These are the systems that are passed down. And I see that, me being, I call myself beige, because of my Greek heritage, but yeah, look, I mean, I've you know, been a white man, and I want to be able to hear from you, your thoughts on that subject, on how to kind of like make people understand another perspective.
Oh.
Do we have time?
But also, I think often for the person who is like, well, I'm skeptical. I don't know if this is true. You tell me. It's like, I think it's also a matter of like picking your battles. Like I'm, for those people who are skeptical of like, patriarchy and colonial mindsets and capitalism and how all of these things have intersected to create the world that we live in now. If there isn't kind of a baseline acknowledgement of that, I think it's going to be really super difficult. But I think in terms of, you know, I think something that can often be helpful is just things like data, and I don't have any data necessarily to hand, but if you're thinking about the kinds of spaces that you're inhabiting within electronic music, whether you're a producer or a promoter or running a space or running a record label or just a punter, I would encourage anybody to just really do your own personal audit, to be like, okay, so this is my favorite club. Like, oh, okay, so who are the people who are running it? It's like, okay. Or who are the people who are running record labels? Or who are the people who are benefiting? And we're kind of talking about financial benefits, but also kind of like the social capital of being associated with things. Who are the people who are able to benefit from this most often? And this is something that I talk about with my students sometimes. We do like little lessons on electronic music. If you just think about just look up who are the top 10 highest earning artists in electronic music at this time. I think with the exception of Steve Aoki, it's all cis white men. And if you think about the kinds of people who enjoy electronic music and love it and support it and listen to it and consume it, that kind of demographic pool is super, super mixed. So, yeah. I think the data can be pretty telling.
Yeah, and I mean that's what I guess that it goes to show that we're seeing people people who are sort of behind festivals, behind these labels, and it I guess as a word of encouragement for people of color, non-binary, or everyone that's sort of for inclusion and equality. I mean, people should be stepping up and getting themselves involved as well. But there are, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is understanding this what do we because everyone has challenges to face, and the grind, it varies for everyone, and this is the part where I usually get caught up in conversation, is that the grind exists for everyone, and it's if you whatever you want to carve out, it's going to be difficult, but there are certain obstacles that are different for people, right? And that's where I like to kind of point at that. Certain obstacles are different, and is that, would you be it as in your lecturing, and is this the same kind of conversations that you're having?
Yeah, and I think and when it comes to and this is a real pedantic thing of mine, but I started to kind of bristle at the word inclusion, because I think, there's kind of it's just part of culture now, this diversity, inclusion, equity stuff. But I think that the word inclusion itself can be problematic, because it's still suggesting a kind of a hierarchy, right? It's I'm including you in this. I'm making a decision to include you in this. And I think a more powerful term or a more powerful principle is belonging. It's kind of approaching a situation saying these people belong here and they're not here, rather than I'm choosing to include them. So that's kind of a personal mission of mine that I've been on the last year or so, is even just thinking about that kind of language. And also when you think of it through the prism of belonging, it's rather than thinking about it through kind of intentional inclusion, it's well, what are the barriers for this person feeling like they belong here? Is it because there's nobody else who in this space that mirrors their cultural background, mirrors their gender background, mirrors their class background, which is something that is not talked about enough in electronic music? Is it because it is clear that there are certain types of social situations where people are able to develop the social capital to take them further along in their careers? I think something that I realized early on is that, of course, here there's electronic music business here, but a lot of kind of connections and bonds are built at the bar, at the after party, in these spaces where not everybody is welcome. Gatekeeping is a huge issue. Not everybody is comfortable. So, I think thinking of things through this prism of belonging is a more resonant way of being able to pick up these nuances of why is it that everybody in this space looks exactly like each other.
That's a really interesting point. Just chatting about this with a friend of mine on the weekend about how the economic status of someone or their position, certain festivals that are happening now during the summer, only a certain demographic and economic sort of situation can they're able to attend these festivals, you know, and
Absolutely.
and it does have it does create and you know, I don't want to be up. I don't encourage that. Well, you need to get a better job, or you know, to be able to like. No, it's just like there are people who are don't feel that this is untouchable for them.
Yeah.
You know, like the and I think that is what I'm getting from your description there.
Absolutely. And I can give another example there of like, I mean, thankfully, I think I'm old enough to have skated past the whole like intern industrial complex that Berlin creative industries run on. And, you know, the companies that I have worked for, there has been this kind of, I don't know, it's just built into the culture. And maybe it's global and I'm just, you know, I was of an older generation, but there's this whole kind of category of people who were able to come to Berlin and to just bounce from one internship to another, from this music tech company to this music download company to this music publishing company. And you can only do that if you have the material resources already to pay your rent, to make sure you have groceries, because you cannot live on 300 euros a month in this city. So yeah, that's been a real bugbear of mine. And that's not to say that the people who end up in these internships, who more often than not will establish themselves and create relationships and then end up in paid employment, that's not to say that they're not deserving, but just that barrier of entry is really, really high.
Yeah. It's really just being compassionate towards these hurdles that do exist, and not to say that they don't and just like push them aside and you just got to like work hard, you know, that's it, you know, like, no, I think there's definitely, there has to be some acknowledgement of those hurdles, and they do exist. And like that, going back to sort of the elusive side of things, like, I'm all for, you know, telling someone that, don't, obviously identities and things don't define you. Like, you do you and work through and get yours, you know, but it doesn't mean that these things don't exist. And to, you know, so the challenge and grind exists for everyone.
Absolutely.
There was something I wanted to add to that. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on, you mentioned before about inclusion and how, like, the word inclusion and how that can be more detrimental than do good. Now, what are your thoughts on, say, projects like that are there to help Black artists? What, like, you know, do you find that could also create harm, or does it create, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm like, I'm laughing internally because I'm like, don't start ranting, because this is this is something that I think about a lot, and it's even something that I feel like I engage with as well, because I'm a freelancer, and at this particular time, in particular, I'm entirely aware that particularly the more public-facing things that I'm asked to do, whether it's to be on a board or to be doing a panel or whatever, that yes, it might be about my work, but it is also going to be about, I'm woman, I'm Black, I'm outspoken about these issues. So there is like a certain amount of calculus that has to happen to be like, okay, so I know that this other entity is going to be benefiting in certain ways, like, is it worthwhile? Is there a good balance of me being able to speak freely, me being, you know, like, there's a lot of calculus that has to go on. And I feel like, particularly for Black music artists or music artists from any marginalized backgrounds, now that there are more and more of these kind of like opportunities or kind of focused attention around identity, and when I see other people criticizing them for that, I'm like, I would never criticize the artists themselves. I would criticize the structures, you know. But I think as long as this is why I think it's really important to be able to develop community wherever you are, to feel like you're in community with the people who are around you, who are at a similar kind of peer level, because I think it's important to be able to discuss these types of things and to be like, oh, this opportunity has come up, but I'm not sure if it feels exploitative or not, or I don't know if I'm not asking for enough in terms of financial payment for this or that. So I could really talk about this for a long time. I think it can be a blessing and a curse. I think anything that's going to put money or put kind of access, like really kind of significant access in people's hands who structurally wouldn't have access to it, then go for it. Do your thing.
Yeah. Well, look, it is. These topics are quite complex, and we're talking about dismantling and of certain ideas and frameworks and psychology, behavior, of years, and things are definitely moving in a more positive direction. And I personally believe a lot of things are falling apart and are for the better. And we're in a place where now new foundations are being built and new ways of moving forward. That's the way I perceive it.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your perspective here and reconnecting with you again. And this was a lovely conversation.
Thank you.
Where can the listeners and readers find more about your work at the moment?
I have a website, which is ChristineKakaire.com. That's where I've started publishing the Berghain columns, so they'll be up there every couple of months because some of them will be translated into German in the original format. So I've been given permission to publish the English version there. I'm using
Excellent.
my Instagram now to primarily post about work stuff. So I tend to link things there, which is at the Strawberry Girl, GRRL.
Excellent.
That's where you can find me.
Thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you,
James. It was
James.
lovely to chat with you today. Thank you so much.
Lovely to talk to you as well.